Chamber Web TV. These are one-on-one interviews with candidates in the June 12th provincial election. And today in the offices here at the Chamber of Commerce, I've got the candidate for the Progressive Conservative Party for Cambridge, Rob Leone.
Hey, Greg,
Rob,
how are you?
I'm very good. Is it nice to be an incumbent and have to run in an election?
It's great. I mean, first of all, I will say that certainly it's been an honor and privilege as being the MPP and talking to so many people and building that relationship I have with the Chamber. There aren't too many events that I miss, and it's just a good, warm relationship that we've been able to build. I've been able to build with the Chamber.
Well, and I think it's it's really important for the Chamber's perspective that we have an ongoing good relationship with all of the elected officials, and our Chamber works really, really hard, no matter what the flavor, I suppose, just to make sure that we have good relationships, because we at least have to be able to talk about things for sure. So, Rob, I'm going to talk about some questions, and I think, maybe some viewers might see that they're skewed a little bit, but these are Chamber initiatives, these are Chamber concerns, these are business concerns largely. So, while I know as an opposition member right now, you maybe find it easy to answer some of these questions, but I think, in reality, what we have to do is we have to be respectful of our members, and our members have really identified these issues as being important to them and where they think the province should go. So first and foremost, you and I have had a number of discussions on this. Your colleague Michael Harris has brought forward a bill late last year in 2013 called the Fair and Open Tendering Act, which was really an amendment to correct the Ontario Labour Relations Act, so that it seems so ridiculous, so that the Act could clearly identify that municipalities and school boards are not construction companies. I've said to every single leader, I've said to everybody I've asked or talked to about it, if you were asked if you thought that a municipality or a school board was a construction company, what would your answer be? And there's never been anyone, even the opposition or the leaders, Kathleen Wynne as well as Andrea Horwath, acknowledges, yes, I know people would not believe them to be construction employers, but really the Act still permits that unfairness to go on. And for the life of me and most Chamber members that I've talked to about this, they cannot believe that fairness is actually unfairness when it comes to the Ontario Labour Relations Act. So what would a Tim Hudak government-led government and Rob Leone as Cambridge's member of the provincial legislature, if you were in government, what would you be doing with this act?
Well, I think we have to bring back Michael's bill. It was a bill I voted for, proud to support. The reality, there's two things here. One is the effect that this position of closed tendering has on the tax bill. Whether you're looking at municipalities like Hamilton, whether you're looking at the Toronto District School Board, where it's costing hundreds of dollars just to put a pencil sharpener or install a pencil sharpener, the reason that's happening is because there's closed tendering. People aren't able to bid for those contracts to bring down the price, so that's manageable for people. So there's an effect on the tax bill and the cost of doing business in Ontario that we have to be concerned about. That's the first thing. The second thing is just about being fair and open about how we conduct business in the province of Ontario. Businesses exist all over the place, and there's competition for work. And everyone should have the ability, who's in business today, if it's a contractor, they should have the opportunity to bid on these contracts. And having more people bidding on contracts, again, helps the tax bill, but also helps businesses grow and prosper when they have new markets to try and get some contracts from. So, the thing I think most people should realize, that if those ideas that are happening in Toronto and Hamilton apply here, that things are going to go up. Your property taxes are going to go up. Things like decisions are going to have to be made at your school board level about the kinds of programs and services they can provide. If they're paying excessive contracts and for doing, installing pencil sharpeners or hanging pictures on a wall, that's going to affect students at the end of the day, and that's my concern. I'm a parent of 3 kids with ages 6, 3, and 1, and education is certainly one of those vital areas that concerns me as a parent. So we can do a whole lot to minimize the impact just by opening up the process.
So what you're suggesting is a Hudak government with Rob Leone sitting as Cambridge's MPP would enact as quickly as possible changes or amendments to the Ontario Labour Relations Act to address the issue that's currently before us.
That's right. I mean, our plans in the Million Jobs plan that we've been talking about through the course of the whole winter, really. We were just released it a couple of weeks ago. Included in that is a promise to open up the tendering process so that we don't face these problems and these issues. And I think it'll help taxpayers and voters right across the region.
Excellent.
And the province.
Well, of course,
Yeah.
yes. Because there are other municipalities, Hamilton, I think, and Sudbury,
Sure.
like they've got catastrophic situations
Absolutely.
going on there that are really costing the taxpayers.
In some cases, over 40% increase in
Yeah.
costs for doing business.
And you know, it's not that a unionized construction company can't be competitive. They can be competitive. You know, it's not disadvantaging them. It's just making sure that there's fairness and equity across the platform and saying, you know, a municipality should want more tenders, not less tenders on a particular project. And I think that's what they're saying as well.
That's right.
Yeah. Believe it or not, no other sector of society except business produces money. I've said this a long, long time. I harp on it. You know, if you had a machine in your basement spit out a $1,000 bill, what would you do to protect that machine? You know, you'd do everything to make sure that it continued to spit out $1,000 bills. So that, to me, is really what business is in today's society. We need to protect it. We need to make sure it has an opportunity to do its job, which is spitting out those $1,000 bills all the time, because the money you spend in government comes from what businesses generated. What I spend at Home Depot or Rona or wherever I go is generated through business. So I think it's incredibly important. I think, you know, taxing business is regressive from my perspective. I've always been a big proponent that business shouldn't pay any tax. In some way we should be able to get to that balance. However, your opponents in this particular election are not talking in that manner. They're talking about increasing corporate business tax. They're talking about all kinds of measures that are going to add burden to the business of the day. What would a Hudak government and Rob Leone as MPP for Cambridge do to encourage economic development and fostering business growth in the province of Ontario?
It's a vital question. It's something that we've heard time and time again. As much as I go to the chamber and listen to business leaders, I actually go visit their premises as well, and it's very important to actually have a sense of what's going on. And the cost of doing business in Ontario is significant, and one thing that we can do to reduce that cost for everybody is by lowering the tax. We've committed to doing that. We're pledging a 30% tax reduction. What we're going to do to fund that is that we spend about $3 billion in grants and subsidies for business that go to one company, but the competitor down the road actually doesn't get that grant. In fact, has to pay for it, plus they have to pay for it in the fact that their competitors getting a grant that they're not taking advantage of. So we want to end those programs, those grants and subsidies, and focusing on creating an environment, a level playing field for everybody. You know, in business, the successful businesses are the ones that produce the best goods or provide the best services. That should be the ticket to success in the Ontario economy. But today, it's not the ticket to success. The ticket to success is which Liberal lobbyist are you friendly with who will help you get the grants that will help your business succeed over your competitors. That's not a way to build the economy. So we think that lowering taxes for everybody will help spur private sector job growth. Energy is also a big concern that we have there, and we think we have to address the energy concerns in
we're going to be talking about that
in our marketplace. But the red tape burden as well is something that is burdening everybody. And we're pledging to reduce red tape by 1/3. We're going to tie Cabinet's pay to that target, to that reduction. We're going to put a Cabinet Minister in charge of red tape reduction. Because the last thing businesses need is another person standing in the way from them doing what they do best, providing that best service or producing that best good. So we want to change the environment. We also think that trade, and both in Canada and internationally, is a very important, vital aspect. Many businesses in Cambridge, for example, Aecon and Babcock and Wilcox, do business out west. In the oil sands, for example, we want to foster this environment where we're breaking down some of the trade and non-trade tariff barriers that exist in Canada so that our businesses here in this region, in this riding of Cambridge, can succeed. So there's a whole environment, the whole culture has to change. That's why we've talked about our Million Jobs plan. And that also does mean a leaner government, because a well-run province attracts well-run businesses, and that's also a vital component of our plan. So we have to be honest with people. They want to hear how we're going to spur job growth. We attach numbers to our Million Jobs plan so people can see where we're going to create these jobs over the period of the time of our plan. And it's a plan I think everyone should take a close look at, because in this election there are two stark choices. There's the choice that the NDP and the Liberals are offering, which is more spending and more taxes that are going to hurt business. And there's the choice that we're providing, which is getting out of the way of business, actually getting behind business and helping the private sector succeed. That's the choice in this election, and I'm pretty comfortable of where we stand on that, particularly from a business perspective, particularly from a worker perspective who wants a good job. As you know, we still have in the riding of Cambridge a significant portion of our adult population tied to manufacturing. And what they're worried about, and what they tell me about, is that, yeah, they've heard about these factory closings, whether that's in our region or down the road. They're worried that their job's going to be next. And this is a good middle-class job that pays for the food on the table and a roof over their head. And they're worried that they're going to be next. And if their job goes, they're going to find it hard to put that food on the table. They're going to find it hard to have that roof over their head. That's what needs to change. We need to not only attract more jobs, but keep the jobs that we have here.
Yeah, I would agree. You mentioned energy costs, and they're actually, even statistically, they'll tell you that the energy costs in Ontario are driving businesses out, and of course with them jobs. Even the federal government shakes its head at hydro costs in Ontario, because we're among the highest in Canada. In fact, I think, my understanding is even California's cheaper hydro, and I can remember years ago them talking about how expensive hydro was in California, and that was a real problem. So, I think the chamber certainly can come up with some ideas when you look at the hefty pensions and the great benefit programs that the senior management has at Hydro One, I guess, and even the OPA or OPG. What would you do? What would a Hudak government and Rob Leone do for both, not just businesses, but residents as well, in trying to struggle to pay these ridiculous hydro rates?
I want your viewers to take a close look at this, because I brought with me a copy of the hydro bill. This is a company, and every time I actually go visit a manufacturer, the first thing they actually show me is their hydro bill. All right, and this company is called Integrated Packaging Films. It's a company I talk about quite a bit. This is their January hydro bill. Their actual
this past January.
This past January, their actual hydro consumption was $12,000. What would you guess their final bill would be?
Well, $12,000.
$12,000. The end final bill was $62,653.34. That's $50,000 more than their actual hydro consumption. That includes $30,000 plus for a global adjustment. That includes $2,000 change for almost $3,000 in debt retirement charge. If people want to know and grasp the jobs crisis in the province of Ontario, they have to visit a manufacturer and just examine their hydro bill. Now let me just tell you a bit about this company. This company employs about 25 people. Their average wage of their workers is about $30,000 to $40,000. Now we're talking about $50,000 in extra fees and taxes and adjustments and so on in this hydro bill. That's one hydro bill could actually employ another person in this facility in 1 month. So 12 people over the course of a year. But the problem is in Ontario is that these companies are struggling. This company imports its product to manufacture from the United States and then exports the final product back to the United States. So the question, it doesn't take very long to ask the question, what's this person doing here in Ontario? And the reason they're still here is that they have a family here, they've built a life here. But if they're looking at the hard numbers, instead of creating 12 jobs with their hydro bill each month, the 25 people who rely upon this company to put food on their table and a roof over their heads is in danger of leaving.
Well, the problem that I would see is if a company like this was a subsidiary of a U.S. firm or some other European firm, that European or U.S. firm is going to make the decision on whether they stay here.
It doesn't take long to actually come up with that analysis, and that's the problem. That's the jobs crisis. That's why you see Kellogg's. You still can buy Kellogg's at the grocery store. You can still buy Heinz ketchup at the grocery store. Those products used to be made in Ontario. They're not being made here anymore. And we have to actually fix this problem, and I think this is one of the pressing issues in this
So
election.
what would you do to fix it?
So first of all, we spent about $20 billion in green energy subsidies for wind and solar that we're producing. We're paying producers up to 80 cents a kilowatt hour. We're charging consumers, a fraction of that amount. So we think those subsidies are simply unaffordable, they're unsustainable, and they contribute to massive contributions to why your hydro bill is so high. So we don't want to put more on the system. We think that we have to look at and examine the whole process. Certainly the contracts that have been signed and the structures up, we're going to see those contracts and live through those agreements. But if there are new contracts that haven't been put in place, whether they're contracts that are in the pipeline yet to be approved, we're saying stop. We can't do this anymore. We can't afford this. Because what ends up happening is that we charge these producers of energy up to 80 cents a kilowatt hour. But sometimes this energy is being produced when we don't need it. So then the energy gets sold off to the United States or to neighboring provinces and states at a severe discount, sometimes as low as 3 cents for the kilowatt hour. This is totally unacceptable. This all adds up to your hydro bill. Whether you're going to use that hydro or not, you're going to be paying the difference in global adjustments and delivery charges and so on. So we think we should not add to that process. Certainly the debt retirement charge is something we want to take a look at, to remove the debt retirement charge. And you mentioned something else that's very important, and we've talked about reducing the size of government by about 10%. One of the first places we'll look at is this hydro bureaucracy. We have 11,000 people working in our hydro bureaucracy that make over $100,000 a year. Now, no one would be complaining if bloated bureaucracy actually led to lower hydro bills, but the opposite's actually what's taking place. In fact, it's contributing to those hydro bills. And the third thing that I would say is that the siting of power projects has to be concerned about local, what the local municipality is thinking about. So local decision making, we need to restore local decision making. Part of the problem with those gas plants is the fact that these were sited in communities that did not want these power plants. This led to the Liberals deciding to build those plants where they did. The community was dead set against it from moment one. And it ended up that on an eve of election, we had this $1 billion gas plant cancellation that's now going to show up on our hydro bills as well. So if we don't put these things where people don't want them in the first place, we get to save $1 billion at least in terms of trying to move projects really at the 11th hour, like these projects were moved. And that is, in essence, we can talk about the scandal and the deleted emails and all of that. But the heart of the issue was a decision to put these power plants where they were not wanted to begin with. That decision rests with the Liberal Party and the Liberal government, and it's why we're going to spend $1 billion to move that, because they figured out on an even election that they might lose some seats. And that's what this is all about at the end of the day. And the Auditor General, two Auditor General reports, two separate Auditor Generals, looked into these gas plants and said that the decisions were made in the cancellation process where every decision seemed to add to the final cost going up. So the decisions were made for political reasons. They weren't made for reasons other than to try and save some seats and to try to save political hide. And I think voters are very disenchanted about the whole process. So we have to be certainly holding the government to account with this, but to make sure that this doesn't happen again, let's talk to the people where we're going to put these plants before any of this blows up again.
It was interesting because I just saw something really unique where somebody's invented solar highways and solar replacement for asphalt, which is obviously it's not something that we're going to see in the coming few years, but
wonder what a pothole would look like.
Well, I think what one person posted was, I could see somebody stealing one when their driveway screwed up, but it's interesting. I think it's more about looking outside the box of what's available and what we can do. So because I think hydro rates have to be railed in somehow or another.
And just so I can add to that, I know we're talking about corporations here, but this also applies to your own hydro bill.
Oh, for sure.
That's why people, when they see this, are shocked, but sometimes not surprised, because they've seen this. They see it with their own hydro bill, and they can see it happening right to them. This is just multiplied, 10, 20 times what average homeowners are paying in their hydro bill, because it's a business that actually consumes hydro. But it doesn't take a lot to extrapolate the problem here. And we feel that our hydro policies and the ones that I just outlined, the ending the wind and solar subsidies, the trying to trim the fat on the hydro bureaucracy, and making sure that we cite things properly will save $300 to $400 for the average family on their hydro bill. We think that's reasonable. That's not about manipulating anything. This is just about governments doing what they're supposed to, minding your money and being as efficient as possible and making decisions that are consistent with what the community desires.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Infrastructure, as we both know, is critically important. It's fostering sustainable economy. It's imperative that we look, at all kinds of solutions, trains included. Rail systems are great, but in North America, we're not accustomed to them like they are in Europe. So they're, to some degree, they're not quite as effective. We're widespread, and we need to move goods and services. And the real problem is you're not going to be able to get anything to your local Canadian Tire store or any other store by rail. It's always going to be via a truck. Mm-hmm. I know that your leader has talked a lot about some road infrastructure that's required, I think, through the Niagara Peninsula, but he's also talked about rail. What would a Conservative government bring to Ontario from an infrastructure transportation package?
Well, I think we should go back to first principles. First principles is to pay for infrastructure projects when you have the money to do it. Mm-hmm. That clearly isn't happening. We have now $57 billion in spending commitments from this government in this election. $57 billion that they simply do not have. And I think that's a concern for me as both a politician and a taxpayer. And this is, I'm scratching my head at how they think people can actually grasp the fact that we can actually dig ourselves further in the hole and not have a problem with that. So I think we have to go back to first principles. I think the decisions we make on infrastructure must be led by the evidence provided. And the guiding principles have to be what can move the most people and what can move the most goods. And you make your decisions on infrastructure on the basis of that. We feel that the Highway 7 extension should be built. That's something that we've said that has to happen. We've also suggested that there's a mid-peninsula highway that we could build to increase and improve trade. And let me give you an example. We have companies in Cambridge. Let's just use Babcock and Wilcox. They make pretty big things. Mm-hmm. They don't have quick access to water as a primary mode of transportation for their massive boilers mm-hmm. and such. Now, what has to happen in order for them to get their products to a port is that they have to spend about $5 million transporting this product through our streets. They have to move traffic lights. They have to make sure that the hydro wires aren't going to touch the product. Mm-hmm. It's like if you watch that show where they move houses on Discovery or HGTV. Yep. It's like that. You have to make sure that all happens.
Massive moves, I think it is.
And companies like Babcock's, it's an international company mm-hmm. that compete right around the world. Their competitors are right on the water, so they don't have to face those challenges. Mm-hmm. And there's lots of companies like that. So what we can do is to say, let's create this corridor. This would provide companies here in this region with a corridor and access to a port that I think will help spur business and international trade for companies that want to do business here in Southern Ontario, particularly Cambridge, which is what I'm passionate about. Yeah. So that's a real-life example of what a mid-peninsula highway could provide a Cambridge company. And I think there is, while we are, I think the topic du jour will be trains and in this region, the LRT for what it's worth. But we have to make sure that we're not reducing road capacity. I think people want us to invest in our roads and our road infrastructure. And they do like rail, passenger rail, and mm-hmm. I've always been committed to seeing GO trains eventually come to Cambridge once we can prove that A, we have the money to pay for it, and B, that we have the people to use the trains. And make the investments on the basis of the evidence. And I'm working with the city and the region to see that business case through. I'm sure that we've talked to you, and I've talked with the mayor as well, because the chamber is also interested in that as well. And these are something that we can build a strong consensus on and provide that business case that hopefully will lead to a project in the future.
Good. Much has been said about cutting government jobs, especially I think your party leader has really addressed this in talking about lopping off 10% of public sector jobs. The Chamber is concerned that there are parties and candidates that believe that the government of the day is 100% efficient. meaning if we took one job away, that there'd be some inefficiencies. And of course, we know that that's pie in the sky, and there's not even any companies that are 100% efficient. So, however, the core mandate of any elected official in any level of government is to be a good steward of the public purse. All other actions and duties are absolutely optional. With that understanding, we know government is not 100% efficient. Do you believe that a complete review of who does what, as well as a review on salary and benefits levels in the government, should be done?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that most people would see that government's not even 90% efficient, and so there is room to trim. I just mentioned in my the last question about hydro, we had these 11,000 hydro bureaucrats that make over $100,000 a year, and nobody would be complaining if more people and more money were helping to lower the cost of doing business. The exact opposite's the case. And I can point to education. I'm the education critic for our party. Today we spend $9.5 billion more per year in education than we did in 2003. We have 250,000 fewer students in the system. Now, no one would be complaining that if we had that much more money invested in addressing a lot fewer students, no one would be complaining if our standardized test scores in mathematics, for example, were actually going up, but they're not. Our international standing in mathematics is actually going down. To the point where we were actually doing better in math, our students were doing better in math in 2003 when we left office than they are today. When you look at PISA international comparisons, for example. So this is the problem, and I think most people would understand that cutting back on some of the middle management, layers of middle management, putting that money and investing it into the front lines to improve services, I think is the way to go. And certainly we've made that commitment in healthcare. We think the money, hundreds of millions of dollars we're spending on local health integration networks, would be better spent hiring more nurses and doctors in primary care. We think that the Ontario Power Authority, for example, is just an agency that is just adding to the cost of doing business and your hydro bills. We think the College of Trades is certainly something that we can do away with. Rather than encouraging young people to get into the skilled trades, it's actually taxing those people, the very people who are working hard and trying to earn a living in this province from doing business. There are so many things that have grown over the last number of years. We have over 700 agencies, boards, and commissions. Most people haven't even heard of these agency boards and commissions. To say that we shouldn't review them, I think is ignoring the reality, which is that our deficit is higher today than it was when Kathleen Wynne took office. We have a deficit of $12.5 billion. That's $12.5 billion that we are spending more than we're taking in revenue. That's $1 billion a month more than we're spending more than we're taking in revenue. And most families know that they can't run their own family household budget like that. In fact, we did the calculation that if we ran our homes like the Liberals are running this province in terms of their fiscal approach, that we would be spending, an average family making about $40,000 or $50,000 would be spending over $5,000 on interest payments, not even touching the principal. All right, the principal is not going down. In fact, the principal is going up. And that's the other thing I want people to realize, that while the deficit number is $12.5 billion, which shocks me, the debt's actually going to grow by more than $20 billion this year. That's on top of everything else, that they're actually adding even more to the debt than that simple deficit number. This is the challenge that we face, and you know that if you ran your home or your business like this, that it wouldn't be too long before someone would be knocking on your door to say, pay your bills or else I'm taking you.
My wife wouldn't be too happy about that.
Well, of course, I'm not going to comment on your wife
well,
at all.
Well, you'd be in the same problem.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. So, I mean, people realize that, and I think that certainly we've made the commitment that we have to trim the size of the bureaucracy by 10%. I do want to reassure people that this isn't something that we're happy about. This is something that we feel is necessary. And we're not going to go in there and day one start firing people. What we're going to do is make sure that most of these jobs are going to go through attrition. Some of the vacant positions that are currently out there, we're not going to hire.
I think your leader had said that it was going to be primarily through attrition.
That's right. Some programs will close. We realize that some programs will close, and some programs are going to be shifted to the private sector. Do we need Do we need people, for example, spinning roulette wheels in our hospitals, or do we actually need to hire more nurses? And that's the choice I think people are going to be confronted with. We don't think we should be spending government money hiring roulette wheel and poker card dealers at the casinos. We think we should be hiring more nurses and doctors. That, at the end of the day, I think is a message that people ought to hear. We live in this community. We live among teachers and nurses and doctors and public servants. We appreciate the good work that they do, but this government's grown by too much. We want to make sure that we bring them down to 2009 levels. 2009 was a year that we were supposed to have temporary stimulus. Well, that stimulus was never temporary. In fact, we've added to it. So there has to be someone that comes up and says, look, enough's enough. We have to rein in government spending, and there's a plan in place to do it. And I think people, any party will have to balance the books. Who pretends they want to balance the books will either have to cut spending or they'll have to raise taxes. And if they're not going to tell people what they're going to do, the assumption is that they're going to raise taxes. And if that's what you're going to run an election on, fine, but tell people about it. You only have one party in this election that's being honest and forthright with people, who says that there's a challenge, who has a plan to address that challenge. And I'm happy to be part of that party, because people, I think, at this point in time want honesty. They want to make sure that the person that's in charge actually grasps the problems and has plausible solutions to those problems.
But your critics are saying that there's going to be, in fact, the advertisements on TV and on radio are talking about less nurses, less teachers, less, and I realize that politicians and political parties will always paint the doom and gloom about their opposition, but how much reality is there in the fact that there's going to be a bunch less teachers, there's going to be a bunch less nurses, there's going to be all these frontline staff that really deliver the service, the service we touch and feel. What reality is it that they're going to be gone?
Well, nurses, doctors, police officers, we've said that we have to make sure that public safety and health care are protected.
I think one came out with firefighters, and firefighters aren't under the responsibility.
Yeah, I'm not really sure where that one came from, but people are going to say what they're going to say. But we do suggest in education, for example, that we have to make some certain key investments. We think that special education has to be protected and enhanced, and we have to help the students that need the help. We also say that there are 300 schools in our province that are underperforming, where more than half of the students in those schools don't meet the provincial standards. We think that we actually have to put more resources into those students and more resources into those schools. But you can't say that without actually telling people where the money is going to come from. So we have suggested that we're going to modify full-day kindergarten, so that we change the structure of the classroom. We're actually going to make the class sizes smaller and let one teacher lead a class of 20 students. We have suggested that in some primary and secondary school classes that we're going to have a slight, modest increase in class sizes by 2 or 3 students to make sure that we're able to apply some of that money to where it's needed and where it's targeted, to target the funding where it's necessary. All the other stuff that people are saying, what I would say, you're going to read a lot about or see a lot of these commercials on TV over the next little while, but read our platform. We're not hiding the numbers in any particular way, but you have to realize that the people who are putting those commercials on have a vested interest.
Of course.
They have a vested interest because they've had it good for 11 years. What we're saying is that change is necessary. We actually want to see student achievement improve. We're not only in the business of protecting social services and healthcare and education. We actually want to enhance them and make them better for people. And that's, I think, what any reasonable person in my position should want.
Don Drummond, a few years ago, was hired by the provincial government. Dalton McGuinty was the leader of the party at the time and had a majority government. He set out Don Drummond on a specific mandate, and he said to Don, I want you to look at the broad range of services that the provincial government offers. I want you to come up with solutions to be able to tackle this in deficit and long-term indebtedness. But I want you to spread the pain thinly across. I don't want you to attack one area more than another. And you can't look at more tax revenue or new taxes in order to balance it. You've got to find the efficiencies within government. Don Drummond came out with 364, I believe, solutions to that. All tiny little adjustments here and there along the way. But he did say what was really interesting, because I had the opportunity to interview Don Drummond after that. The interesting fact was, he said that if you don't adopt all 364, if you just adopt 363, you got to find one more solution that was better than the one that you dropped in order to make this work. Because if we don't do this stuff, if we don't attack it and achieve the goal as set out in his final report, the Drummond report, that we're on a path to being like Greece, where they're bankrupt and they can't even muster up any support from their neighbors in their own European Union to really help bail them out. What would a Tim Hudak government do, and what would Rob Leone in particular do as a member of Parliament or a member of provincial legislature for Cambridge? What would you do? Would you look at that report again and make sure that we've done all we can do to balance that?
Dust it off the shelf. First thing to do, first order of business. You'll actually read our Million Jobs Plan. Many of the things that we say in that Million Jobs Plan come from the Drummond Commission, the Drummond report. He actually set the roadmap for us. So this is a Liberal commissioned report on how to get our province back on track. And we just feel that the Win Liberals have completely abandoned
I think
that.
what a lot of people don't know too, Rob, is that Don Drummond, I think, was one of the premier advisors to Paul Martin when Paul Martin was the finance minister for Canada. And, you know, so it wasn't
leading economist.
He was a leading economist. It's not that, you know, if you would paint him any political shade, you would have to paint Don Drummond in the shade of red, because you know, he was hired by a Liberal government. He formerly worked for a Liberal government as well. But for some unknown reason, you know, less than a handful of those recommendations got any sort of embraced comfort.
Yeah, I mean, the government claims that they've done 80% of the report. I just would like them to show me that.
Well, I don't
believe them. You know, frankly, we were spending more today than we did when the report came out, so it can't be possible that that's the case.
I think the Ontario Chamber would reiterate that. The Ontario Chamber largely came out with the last budget, you know, very, very much opposed to the last budget. And they widely supported the Drummond report when it first came out and said, you know, yeah, implement all. I remember at that time interviewing John Tory. Of course, now John Tory is running for the mayor of Toronto. But I asked him, I said, if John Tory was premier of the province of Ontario and Don Drummond did that and presented with 364, how many of those would you adopt? And, you know, we all know John Tory was not a hard right guy. You know, he was more in the middle, centrist of everything. He said I'd adopt 363 and I'd find a better one to fill in that 364th. You know, I don't know why you would go out as a government and adopt. I thought it was a brilliant piece of work because he did spread the pain thinly.
Well, and it's incredibly well researched. I can speak as the education critic for our party. You know, the recommendations that we're making in this election come from the Drummond report. I mean, he did the baseline work for us. He read on class sizes. He read the C.D. Howe report. He read the Canadian Education Association's report on. He studied American studies on class sizes and class size reductions, and came up with a recommendation on a modest increase. While it may not be politically popular, it does not adversely affect student achievement, and that was a well-researched part of his plan, a plan that we're going to take a hard look at. You know, he talked about scrapping full-day kindergarten, but if he said if you're not going to scrap full-day kindergarten, at least adjust the staffing levels of those classrooms, which is another recommendation that we're taking. You know, and there's some recommendations that we didn't feel particularly fond of, particularly affecting the 60,000 jobs in the horse racing industry. But we do have, and we have listed a number of things that would replace some of those things that we might not find as acceptable. One of which is a across-the-board public sector wage freeze that would save about $2 billion annually for the government, and we think that could help us obviously balance our books. And we are committed to balancing our books ahead of Don Drummond's recommended time. We are committed to balancing it by 2016, at least a year ahead of everybody else, although we don't believe that everybody else has the plan that will actually get you there. Particularly if you look at the last Liberal budget, who are talking about massive spending reductions in the last 2 years of that fiscal plan. Do you hear them talking about those spending reductions in any way, shape, or form? If they're not planning to offer those spending reductions, they're going to have to raise taxes to actually balance their books. So have you heard about the taxes that they're going to raise and to do that? And the finance documents that we've been able to uncover through the course of doing opposition work on the Estimates Committee have shown exactly where the Liberals have planned to raise revenue. There's 52 of them, in fact, including a 10 cent a litre gas tax increase. Well, if you're trying to move more people and goods in the province of Ontario, the last thing you need is to raise the price of gas. So
we just got an increase when HST was applied to gas.
Exactly.
It wasn't before.
Gas is now over 10 cents a litre more today than it was back then because of the HST. So we have to be honest with people. Tell them the state of affairs. There was a roadmap set out. We think we should follow that roadmap. And again, Don Drummond was, I think, precise when he said that if you're not going to adopt this, so if you're not going to adopt 20% of our report, as the finance minister claims he has, is all that's left, then what are you going to do to replace that? And we have not heard that roadmap at all. And that's what concerns me. It concerns me that in this election, that political parties, particularly the NDP and the Liberals, think they can pull a fast one on voters who don't actually realize or acknowledge the gravity of the situation in the province of Ontario today. I don't think voters I think they are smart. I think they're smarter than some politicians might give them credit for. And I think they're really ready to hear a plan that's consistent, that has clear direction. We need to create private sector jobs in the province of Ontario. We want to create 1 million of them. I think they're ready, they're willing and receptive to the ideas that we're bringing forth. And I think I want people to, if they haven't read our plan, to go directly to it at amillionjobsplan.com. They can read the plan in its entirety, and we do talk about how we're going to create 1 million jobs. We do talk about how we're going to balance the books. We talk about providing and enhancing our health care, and we talk about education, which is so important as well. And it's the plan, I think, that has certainly garnered the most attention in this election, and that's because everyone else seems to lack ideas to get us back on track.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I also offered the opportunity for every candidate here to submit a question that I would ask them through this, because they might not have liked my question. So I think Rob didn't mind my questions, but certainly he submitted a question which really falls in line with his role and responsibility in opposition now as a critic. So here is the question. Companies in Cambridge have expressed concern that graduates are coming into the workforce without the basic math and literacy skills needed to succeed in this knowledge-based economy. What is your plan to promote literacy and math for our young students?
It's a critical question. I think that there's a TD Bank study that suggested that even in our adult workforce, but 48% lack the basic literacy and numeracy skills to actually perform their job, which has a huge effect on productivity. And I think that there's something that we actually have to talk more and more about, which is how do we get our workforce to become even more productive in a global economy? Being more productive actually keeps jobs here. That's why last fall I tabled a private member's bill that talks about promoting educational success. It was actually called the Educational Success Tax Credit Act, which sought to build a relationship between the worker and their employer to help that worker become much more educated. More education leads to better productivity. It allows a company who wants to invest in new machinery to become more productive, an employee that's engaged, that's motivated, that has high morale, and has the literacy and numeracy skills to actually make that machine work to its maximum potential. So I think there is a good, from the employer's perspective, more productivity, but from the worker's perspective, higher education, more morale. You're able to help your kids through school, and I think a lot of adults we talk to obviously find and struggle with that as well. And I think it just sets the right tone for what we should be doing. In our schools, I'm very concerned as a parent, again, that we're not doing enough to improve, particularly math education, but even our literacy. We don't teach cursive writing in our schools anymore. We don't teach the times tables as well as we should. There are certain changes that need to be made. That's why we produced a math achievement action plan that I tabled and produced and presented, I should say, on March 5th of this year, which talks about how we can move from the new curriculum, which doesn't focus on fundamental math skills like long division and the times tables, back to those basic core concepts. We have to move back to those basic core concepts and abandon what's called discovery learning. That's one aspect of it, but we also want to make sure that our kids have financial literacy infused throughout the curriculum. One thing that we've been able to see in reading, for example, is that the more you're reading, and almost every subject requires reading, the better your reading proficiency is going to be. Well, if you only do math in one period a day and leave it for the rest of the day, you aren't able to frequently practice your math skills. So how do we think about that in different ways? I think it's important to look at financial literacy. I know the Chamber has been a strong champion of financial literacy. You've won awards, and I'm very proud to talk about that when I'm out and about and being that ambassador that Cambridge wants and needs, and always good to put a plug for Greg DeRocher. But you know, I think that's what people are looking for, and if we look at society today, that we can talk about huge government debt and deficits, but the fact that our household debt is at the level it is actually quite frightening. It, in some ways, is even a greater concern than we have provincial and debt and deficits. We have to actually make sure that we're doing our own budgeting at home properly and helping people get that done. And I think students are receptive to this. We could infuse, for example, you know, in our high school curriculum, how to fill out a student loan form, so you actually get your student loan when you get to grade 12. There's so many ideas out there that we can incorporate in our curriculum that we're not doing today. There's real world examples that help people, once they're done their education, live a life of fulfilled prosperity, and I think that's what people are looking for. And I'm very proud to be part of a party that thinks that we need to focus on math and science education as a primary tool of reform and actually improving our student success.
Well, I'm pretty good at math, but I'm not so good at the English language.
You have the gift of the gab.
I maybe have the gift of the gab, but ladies and gentlemen, on June the 12th, it's not just a right, it's an obligation, we think, that you have to go out and exercise your vote. Today, we've sat down with Progressive Conservative candidate for the City of Cambridge, the current and incumbent MPP, Rob Leone. We hope you enjoyed our conversation, and if you want to get in touch with Rob,
well, you can visit us at 561 Hesper Road. Our phone number is 622-6361, and the website's www.robleone.ca.
And if you want to hear more about the platform, the Progressive Conservative Party, it's millionjobsplan.com. That's it for our discussion with Rob Leone. Rob, it's been great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.